There is a moment in every great family drama when the balance of power shifts, not gradually, not with warning, but in a single instant, the way a room goes dark when someone cuts the lights. In the British royal family, that moment came on September 8, 2022, the evening Queen Elizabeth II drew her final breath at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands. The world wept for a monarch who had reigned for 70 years. But inside the palace walls, something else was already happening. Something quieter, more calculated, and far more consequential for the people who had spent decades positioning themselves around the throne. Within hours of the Queen's passing, a vast private estate, one worth over $1 billion, had a new owner. His name was William, and he had been waiting, patiently and quietly, for a very long time. To understand why this transfer of ownership sent shockwaves through Camilla's world, you first need to understand what the Duchy of Cornwall actually is. Most people have heard the name. Very few understand its scale. The Duchy is not a government institution. It is not managed by Parliament or subject to royal bureaucratic oversight in the way the Crown Estate is. It is a private landholding, established in 1337 by King Edward III, specifically created so that the heir to the throne would always have financial independence from the reigning monarch. Edward gave it to his son, Edward the Black Prince, and the rule has never changed in nearly 7 centuries. The duchy belongs to the sovereign's eldest son automatically, the moment his father or mother becomes king or queen. What that means in practice is staggering. The Duchy of Cornwall encompasses approximately 135,000 acres of land spread across 23 counties in England and Wales. It includes much of the Isles of Scilly off the Cornish coast. It takes in half of Dartmoor. It contains ancient farmland, historic castles, coastal properties, rural estates, and a portfolio of financial investments that has been built up over generations. By 2025, the duchy was generating income for William of approximately $30 million per year. Income he voluntarily pays tax on, even though no law requires him to. The total value of the estate sits at roughly $1.2 billion. It is one of the most significant private landholdings in the entire United Kingdom, and it landed in William's lap the moment his grandmother took her last breath. But here is where the story turns. Because before it was William's, this same estate belonged to Charles. For decades, while Charles was Prince of Wales, the Duchy of Cornwall funded his household, supported his projects, and underwritten his lifestyle. And it was during those same years, the years when duchy income was flowing into Charles's accounts, that Charles was conducting the affair with Camilla Parker Bowles that would tear his marriage to Princess Diana apart at the seams. Diana, by every credible account, found out early and was powerless to stop it. What made it so psychologically devastating was not merely the betrayal itself, but the helplessness that came with it. She was the most photographed woman on earth, celebrated by millions, surrounded by palace staff and royal protection officers at every hour, and yet she was alone in the most important way a person can be alone. Those close to her during those years describe a woman eroding from the inside. She would sometimes pull a trusted member of staff aside and ask, barely above a whisper, whether she was enough. Whether she was beautiful enough. Whether she was interesting enough. When they reassured her, she would shake her head, a small, defeated gesture, as if she had already received the only answer that mattered from the only person whose opinion she was measuring herself against. And that person had already told her, repeatedly, without words, that she was not. Diana spent nights alone in rooms that could have housed entire families, crying quietly so that staff on the other side of walls would not hear. She and Charles had, by all accounts, been effectively living separate lives for years before the separation was made official. And while she was disappearing into herself in gilded corridors, Charles and Camilla were continuing their relationship, meeting in private, sustained by wealth and privilege, the kind of access that only enormous inherited income can provide. The estate that funded all of it now belonged to Diana's son. That detail is not incidental. For William, it is everything. Before we get to what William has already done with his newfound authority, it is important to understand exactly how Camilla had spent the years between Diana's death and the present day building what can only be described as a quiet infrastructure of influence inside the royal family. Because what William is dismantling now was not built overnight. It took Camilla 2 decades to construct it, piece by piece, relationship by relationship, favor by favor. When Charles announced his intention to marry Camilla in 2005, both William and Harry privately asked their father to reconsider. Harry would later write about this conversation in his memoir. The brothers were not asking Charles to end the relationship. They were asking him not to formalize it in a wedding, because a wedding would drag their mother's memory back into every front page in the country and force an ugly public comparison between Diana and the woman who had been her husband's mistress. Charles listened to his sons and then proceeded with the wedding regardless. He chose Camilla. He always chose Camilla. That day established a pattern that would repeat itself throughout the years that followed. Whenever Camilla's interests collided with the feelings or requests of the princes lost. What made it more complicated was that Camilla did not simply rely on Charles's affection to protect her position. She built redundancy into her influence. She cultivated journalists. Her team planted stories. When it suited her interests, a flattering profile would appear in a sympathetic newspaper. When someone else's image needed managing downward, that too could be arranged. Royal commentators have noted that her communications operation was quietly one of the most effective in the palace, not because it was loud but because it was invisible. The machinery worked without most people ever seeing it work. She also worked on Charles directly. Multiple royal biographers have documented that Camilla regularly spoke to Charles in private about his sons, shaping his perception of them, interpreting their actions through a lens that often reflected poorly on them. If William pushed back on something, Camilla was there to offer Charles an alternative reading of his son's motivations. If there was tension, she was the one whispering context into Charles's ear. Over years, this kind of sustained, intimate influence reshapes how a parent sees his children. It is patient. It is effective. And it left both William and Harry feeling that their father was always viewing them through a filter that was not his own. And then there was the matter of Camilla's family. Specifically, her younger sister, Annabel Elliot. In 2005, the same year Camilla married Charles, Annabel was brought on as an interior designer for properties belonging to the Duchy of Cornwall. She worked on holiday cottages on the Isles of Scilly. She refurbished rooms at Ristormel Castle. She transformed the Lwyney Wermod estate in Wales, a property the duchy had purchased and turned into a residence for when the Prince of Wales was travelling in the region. She worked on a barn conversion at Dumfries House in Scotland, turning a rustic agricultural building into a polished private venue used for weddings and events. Over nearly 2 decades, her fingerprints were on some of the most beautiful and historically significant properties in the royal portfolio. There was nothing wrong with her work. By the standards of her industry, she was genuinely accomplished. In 2014, she was ranked among the most influential female interior designers in Britain. But the arrangement she had was not the product of a competitive selection process. She had not won the contract by submitting the most impressive portfolio to an independent review committee. She had the contract because her sister had married the man who controlled the estate. That was the entire foundation of it. And for 20 years it held. What most people have never fully grappled with is the history layered beneath that professional relationship. Because Annabel's connection to the affair between Charles and Camilla did not begin when she was put on the payroll. It goes back further. During the years when Charles was still married to Diana and the affair had to be hidden from the public, from the press, and from the palace itself, there were practical logistics involved. The relationship needed somewhere to exist that was private and safe from attention. Annabel's home in rural Dorset provided that. A quiet house in an isolated village, well away from London, well away from photographers, well away from anyone who might notice or report. Weekend after weekend, it was there that Charles and Camilla could meet. Annabel knew what she was providing. She provided it anyway. Years later, after Diana was gone, after the affair became public history, after the wedding happened, Annabel's loyalty was rewarded with exactly the kind of arrangement that royal insiders call a grace and favor relationship. A long-term contract, steady income, no competitive oversight. Paid, at various points, somewhere between roughly £20,000 and £80,000 per year against £1 billion estate. The financial cost to the duchy was negligible. The symbolic value to Camilla was enormous. Her sister was embedded inside the institution, drawing an income connected to the same estate that had once funded the affair they were both complicit in concealing. It was brazen in its tidiness. When William became Duke of Cornwall in September 2022, he was now Annabel's employer. And he wasted very little time. He did not call a press conference. He did not issue a statement. He did not write a letter to Camilla explaining his thinking or offer any kind of graceful transition period. What he did was wait for the Duchy of Cornwall to publish its routine annual financial accounts, a dry, technical document that most people outside specialist circles never read, and when it was published, Annabel Elliott's name was simply gone. 20 years of royal employment ended without a single public word from the man who ended it. A royal source, speaking carefully but clearly, described William's decision as part of a broader effort to cut away what this source called the royal hangers-on, the network of arrangements Charles had constructed around the edges of the duchy that had less to do with operational necessity and more to do with personal loyalty to Camilla and her world. At the same time, William was quietly filling positions in the duchy with people of his own choosing. Among those he brought in were personal friends who are godparents to his children. Out went Camilla's family. In came William's people. The transition from one era to another was already underway, conducted not through speeches or announcements but through payroll documents and appointment decisions. The message did not require translation. Every person inside the royal household understood it immediately. This was not the only signal William sent during this period. At Christmas, the annual royal gathering at Sandringham, a tradition that spans generations of the British monarchy, became a flashpoint. Camilla decided to invite her son Tom Parker Bowles, her child from her first marriage, to join the family celebrations at the main house. Reports emerged that William made his position clear. He would not attend the main Christmas gathering if Tom was present. Camilla was informed of this. She invited Tom anyway. Tom came. William did not attend the main lunch. He remained at Anmer Hall, his own home on the Sandringham estate, with Kate and their children. The future king had been pushed out of a family Christmas at a property he will one day own, because the current queen had decided that her preferences took precedence over his objections. It was an extraordinary assertion of authority by Camilla. It was also, in retrospect, a miscalculation. Then came the moment that played out in full public view during Donald Trump's state visit to Windsor Castle. Kate was in warm, easy conversation with Melania Trump when Camilla stepped in and made a short, firm gesture in Kate's direction, the kind of motion, as multiple body language analysts subsequently described it, that was impossible to read as anything other than a signal to step aside and yield the space. It lasted a second. It was seen by millions. A body language specialist who analyzed the footage described it as Camilla pulling rank, a public demonstration of hierarchy directed at the woman who will one day be queen. William's reaction, according to those close to him, was not diplomatic detachment. He was furious. Not because he was unaware of the tensions that existed. He was aware. But there is a difference between private friction and a public performance of dominance directed at his wife, in front of world leaders, on camera. At the same time, behind closed doors, Charles was having quiet conversations with his son about the future. He was asking William, according to sources with knowledge of the discussions, to leave Camilla alone after he was gone. To protect her. Not to push her out. It is the kind of request that carries enormous weight, coming from a dying father to his son, and it speaks to how clearly Charles understood what was coming. He knew William. He knew what William was capable of when the power was finally his. And so he asked. Whether William's answer will match his father's hopes remains, for now, the most important open question in the British royal family. Because here is what Camilla now faces. The private homes she walks through every day, Balmoral, Sandringham, do not belong to her. They belong, currently, to Charles. When Charles dies, they pass instantly and automatically to William. She has no legal claim on either of them. She will be a guest in those houses only if William chooses to extend that courtesy. She sold her own private property, a home in Wiltshire she genuinely loved, years ago in order to commit fully to her royal life. That decision, which probably seemed reasonable at the time, now looks like the removal of the last safety net she had. When Charles is gone, she will have nowhere to go that is truly hers. She will depend entirely on the goodwill of the man whose mother's life she helped to ruin, a man who has spent years watching, storing, waiting, and who has already shown, through the quiet disappearance of a name from a financial document, exactly what kind of patience and precision he is capable of. The duchy she spent 2 decades using to reward her family now belongs to him. The home she calls her own will belong to him. Her title, which is not protected by birth and was never guaranteed, will be at his discretion. The entire architecture of the comfortable life she engineered, piece by careful piece, over 20 years sits on a foundation that William now controls completely. And unlike his father, who always found a reason to choose Camilla, William has spent a lifetime finding reasons to remember Diana. He does not need to act dramatically. He does not need to declare anything publicly. He simply needs to do what he has already started doing, slowly, deliberately, without announcement, and the empire Camilla built will come apart the same way it was assembled. Quietly. Methodically. One name at a time.